Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umir, who's a professional football scout and analyst. And today we're here to break down whether or not Maresca's Chelsea have got far worse in the second part of the season and whether that's a direct consequence of Cole Palmer. So starting straight off with obviously everything about Chelsea at the moment, they've just come back off a huge win against Fulham in terms of the race for Champions League, but after Nottingham Forest win the other day against Spurs, it does leave they're still under pressure and with very, very hard games to go. I think they've got Everton, Newcastle United, Liverpool, Forest left in the hunt for Champions League. So in the first part of the season, up to the 16th of December last year, having played 16 games, they had 34 points behind only Liverpool by 2 points and had a goal difference of 18. But since then, since the turn of the 17th in December, they have played 17 games and got 23 points, which is the 14th best in the Premier League, and they have 0 goal difference. So I think at the start of the season, it's pretty funny actually, because we did a video and I said Maresca was manager of the season up until that point. Because I thought, given the youngest squad, given what he'd done, and I think obviously having him in second, I don't think anyone predicted that. And I think a lot of people have maybe overrated the quality that Chelsea had in the squad a little bit, and I thought it was quite shocking that he had him where he had him, which is why I put him as the manager of the season. But since then, since the turn of the year, Chelsea have been, quite frankly, shocking. They have 23 points since the turn of the year, and obviously they had just picked up 3 points at Craven Cottage. And the teams that are below them, West Ham, United, Tottenham, Ipswich, Southampton, Leicester, which for a team going for the Champions League is not good. So I want you to just run through, obviously, kind of the tactical foundations of obviously what he's been trying to implement throughout the course of the season, and maybe why it's actually gotten worse as they've played more games and got more familiar.
So like you mentioned, obviously we touched upon this earlier on in the season, and Enzo Maresca's kind of got his distinct style. There was actually a quote recently that he said where I think somebody asked him, are you going to change your style, or would you ever change your style? And he goes, I don't know, and I don't want to change my style. Yeah. I've got one way of playing and I believe in it, and if it works, I believe it will work. And generally there's a quite a set structure with his teams. Throughout the season, he's kind of played with 3 at the back here, 2 in midfield, 5 across that last line. And I think this is a very common shape across many of the big teams in world football. So this doesn't tell us much in and of itself. How this shape is exercised is different from a Maresca team versus some other managers. One thing I'll actually note is against back fives, he often pushes this third player a little bit higher, and then you almost have this sort of 2-2-5-1 shape. But generally, it's this sort of 3-2-5. And in this shape, there's not too much freedom. I think at the start of the season, we tended to note some of these sort of movements from these number 10s into these wider areas, and we termed that double width, and that allowed Chelsea to progress down the sides when teams often blocked a lot of the central areas. We still see some of those movements, but probably not as much. I think you've got a nice statistic, actually. It'll probably be worth mentioning at this point about Palmer's involvement in these areas versus these wide areas, because at the start of the season, he was picking the ball up a lot in these wider areas, and now he's a lot more sort of centrally focused.
Yeah, so perfectly kind of segued into what I want to talk about, which is obviously the impact that that's had on the personnel. And as you mentioned, these movements were really common at the start of the season, and I thought it was actually something that was quite, modern, fresh, something I'd not really seen before, and that was using these wide midfielders, who is usually Enzo Fernandez and Cole Palmer, now to drop here, and obviously that leaves you with having this overload on the centre, overload on the wide areas rather than the centre. But Cole Palmer in the first half of the season, going off the same period where Chelsea's form has dropped off. In the first half of the season, he had 50% of his touches. So if we split the pitch into a third, he had 50% of his touches on the right-hand side, 25% down the middle, and 25% on the left-hand side. Since the turn of Cole Palmer's poor form, it's 33%, 33%, 33%, which is obviously even level of touches across the pitch. And I think one thing that we noted was Pochettino kind of give this Cole Palmer freedom when he was there, and he didn't allow him just to hold that one position. He could drift there, he could move deeper. But I think under Maresca, as the weeks have gone by, he's built almost an even more rigid system. And I think what I probably disguised, or maybe it was a coached method or something, but at the start of the season, I thought he was being adaptable. I thought he was giving the players the freedom within the structure, as we was talking about. But it almost seems now, as the season's gone on, that the framework has got even tighter and more rigid. And we can tell that by Cole Palmer's touch map. He's not being allowed to completely drift out to the right-hand side as much as he was in the first half of the season. He's now committing all of his touches in these specific zones between the pitch, obviously, as it's shown by having 33%.
Yeah.
And before I put it back onto you, we can see from his chance-creating carries map that we've got here by Opta, in the first half of the season, he's playing a lot of these vertical passes through the pitch, like into the box. So if he's facing up the box here, he's driving after a carry, playing it very vertical forward, or he's coming inside and he's playing very vertical. Again, since the turn of the year and since the turn of the drop of form, we can see that his passes are now moving around the centre of the around the D of the block. So he's playing around the block rather than through the block. And in fact, he actually hasn't made an assist through a chance-creating carry since the turn of the bad form, whereas before he had 4 in the first half of the season. So it's clear that Chelsea are getting more of the ball, and I think because they're having more of the ball and because they're coming more of a Maresca team, it's not giving these players these moments to kind of produce these instinct moments. And I think Pedro Neto's maybe a player who produces on instinct as well, maybe Jackson as well. Now they're having more possession. Do you think they've become a little bit more, I don't want to use the term like, boring or anything like that. They've just become a more phased team, like they are fixed on having possession. This is our structure against your structure. And do you think that's working? Because I'm looking at the players they're putting in certain zones. I still don't believe that that's Enzo Fernandez's best role. I don't believe Cucurella should be crashing the box as much. Same with Gusto. I don't think Reece James should be in midfield. What have you made of kind of the emphasis that Maresca's put on the structure in the team and the players he's given the big roles to?
Yeah, well, I think in general we are seeing this sort of more strict system, but what I term from all of this is basically you look at the in-between phase, and that's the phase that Chelsea got at really well. And what I mean by the in-between phase is when you've got a team like this, for example, in a set shape, it's hard to break them down because you've got a lot of the ball and then you've kind of got to go around them, and you're playing against teams who are set with 5 at the back or sort of 4-4-2, 4-5-1 formations deep in their own half. And Chelsea have a lot of the ball. They're naturally a possession side. So then the game essentially becomes a matter of, can us, with our possession, break down your stubborn defensive block? And then a lot of teams now also have really good counter-attacking threats in their low block in general. So what we've seen from Chelsea in the last couple of seasons, their best games, their best goal-scoring form has come when they've played on the quality of their profiles. And I always come back to this point of, you can try and fit players within to your system and within to your philosophy, but if you're not maximising their profile, if you're not maximising their quality and getting them in their best situations and in their best zones, even if they are generally good players like Cole Palmer is, they're going to feel less empowered and have less confidence to play sort of on that intuition with that sort of quickness that allows you to get at teams. So if I'm looking at this as an example, actually, if you think about it, is it the Wolves game right at the start of the season where it became almost end-to-end, but that was really
better for the team.
Direct free-flowing football. And as a manager, I can understand wanting to reduce the variance, wanting to add more control, wanting to, by all of the underlying metrics, I think, look like a better team, but you're not playing to the strengths of your players. And Cole Palmer, when teams weren't in their defensive shape, when they were trying to get back into their defensive shape, would be able to carry it really nicely and play these brilliant, long, sweeping passes in behind. Jackson would run and attack that space. You had Gusto, who obviously has had less of an impact this season, but as that central force or as that overlapping fullback, apply a lot of intensity and become another player in that final third. And with all of those players, their natural tendencies thrive on being able to attack bigger space or play a bit more vertically. And it's probably easier to score when teams aren't blocking the entire pitch centrally anyway. So I think it makes sense to try and move towards a system that reduces variance and reduces risk and increases control. We've seen the success that Arteta's had with that. But Arteta has individually brilliant players across the pitch and set piece quality that can give you a goal out of nothing. And With Chelsea, their players are good, but they're not all world-class players. And the qualities that they do have that lean into that world-class quality are more in line with playing in that transitional phase.
I will ask you this then, given what we've just spoken about in terms of Maresca's obviously been appointed, it was quite clear the structure and the style he had at Leicester, and obviously they've gone and looked at that and they've found a really strict possession-based team. They've appointed him as a young manager. I think a lot of the blame has to go on the recruitment because...
Well, it depends on how you see it. It's a completely valid point, but I think from the quotes that Maresca said is the board and the higher-ups see it as a few-year project. If they don't, I think he's publicly said if they don't get Champions League this season, they're not worried, which as a fan comes across terribly because, especially from the position that they were in the first half of the season. But if the higher-ups are happy with this being a 2-3 year thing to get a system that is fairly pragmatic and fairly controlled and reduces variance and reduces risk, then I suppose they've gone and hired Maresca knowing that even if they don't get Champions League or immediate results, it's fine. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting that I think a lot of the blame has to go on the recruitment for the kind of the turn of the form. When I was watching, obviously everyone was watching Chelsea last season. Everyone know they needed a new ball-playing keeper. Yeah. We go and watch Leicester last season in the Championship with Maresca. They got Mads Hermansen, who's a really good ball-playing goalkeeper, and he's playing out from the back. And we all know that that's not Robert Sanchez's strength, even though he played for a very good Brighton team playing that way. The fact that they they signed one in Philippe Jorgensen, and he's not come in and started, or he's not got the confidence to play with the ball. I'm looking at the centre half recruitment. I'm looking at
they had to bring Chalobah back anyway.
Yeah, Chalobah. I'm looking. They've got rid of Chukwuemeka. I think in this system he'd probably work really well between the lines. Where Enzo plays, is, being able to carry forward.
He's brilliant in the box as well, and he's got huge legs to kind of.
They went and signed Sancho, and he's a good player. He's a decent player, but the things that he does well, I wouldn't really.
He does well stuff here.
Yeah, I wouldn't really put him on the line in a Maresca team where they're really slow.
1v1 quality out wide because you got your wingers hugging the touchline, and I think Noni does that brilliantly. But I think a player like Doku, for example,
someone who's more like Noni, runs at players 1v1.
Quality,
it's not always clean on the eye, but it's effective and they can do it. I think Jackson as well, they're the 15th for XG performance in the Premier League. They've underperformed by 5.1 expected goals in front of goal, which is just measuring the finishing. It's not only down to Jackson, but you look across the front five, no one can score a goal apart from Palmer in consistent flow.
One point I'll actually make about that, sorry I cut you off, but with your number nines and your players like Fernandes and Palmer, they were players that have been chipping in with goals in the past. So the XG underperformance, I think we need to contextualize it and try and understand why it's happening. And I think it's not completely fair to say, look, their finishing's just suddenly become bad because they're not good at finishing. Yeah. I think it's important to recognize, one, the system in place is giving them different chances now. And even though the XG is of a certain level, that means they're getting shots in good areas. But you can get a shot in a good area and still have 4 players around you. Yeah. Because you're playing in a slower way. Yeah, you're playing in a slow way, high up the pitch. Whereas if you were to have that same shot in a transition situation, that XG suddenly, it's the same, but that chance is a lot easier for you to put away.
Less pressure on the ball.
Exactly. And then secondly, in having a lot of touches, in playing in a way that's kind of more natural to you for Cole Palmer, for example, you have that confidence. You feel like things are going well for you and you're going to try more things. You're going to Cole Palmer was taking shots from distance quite frequently last season, and those are low XG chances, but he's a top quality player. So by the metrics, he'd look good scoring those chances. But now he often gets in positions like this in recent games, and he hesitates. He doesn't play that pass like he does. Yeah, and I think it's, a lot of times football is down to the intangibles, the confidence that a player has, and it's not just to say that's in and of himself. I think the manager and the system and the crowd and all of those things in conjunction can lead to a player being more or less confident in their play.
Yeah, so I'm just going to sort of move on and got a couple points before we kind of wrap up, so I'm going to try and do this well. Yeah. Obviously, they have the youngest squad in the league on average, which is just showing that when we're talking about playing against a deep block, maybe finishing against a deep block is harder than finishing in a transition for a younger player because they're much more built on instinct rather than experience. And obviously, I've got their per 90 games metrics for the same kind of split we're talking about, the first 17, last 16. So obviously their goals is completely down, their expected goals down, obviously goals conceded and expected goals against up. Actually, their expected goals against has gone down since this form, which is obviously showing they're defending by having the ball, but their goals conceded has gone up. So I just want to show you that we're talking here about Maresca emphasising the style of play on the team. So since the last 17 games when Chelsea have been in poor form, Chelsea have actually had more possession, less possession lost in the defensive third, less high regains, shots from fast breaks against has gone up, their direct attacks has gone down and their direct speed has gone down, which shows that they are now playing with the ball more, they're playing slower, they're pressing less because they're having so much more of the ball.
They're playing safer.
And they're playing safer, and no one's stepping onto them to press them because they are losing the ball even less in the defensive third. So obviously it's clear through the numbers and visually when you watch this Chelsea team that they are creeping more and more and more along to being rigid and being the team that I think Maresca wants them to be. But I think for me, I've always looked at managers who play this style of football, and I know people like absolutely despise the style of football when they've got lesser players in each position. But because the framework is so rigid on this player has this role and he has to do that, and I don't mind if you have an outstanding attribute in a different area of the pitch, we're still going to play you in this position. So, for example, Reece James, I know he's just come back from a big injury, and obviously I think they want to limit the amount of physical work he's doing up and down the pitch. There was a moment in the Fulham game where Noni Madueke is squaring up the fullback, Robinson, and Reece James is stood there and he just moves inside rather than doing the traditional Reece James, doing the traditional Reece James thing, which is bursting past the fullback and providing an overlap and whipping the ball in. I cannot get behind. I understand that maybe he doesn't want him to do all this running,
and maybe in and of himself he doesn't feel like he can do that.
Feel like he can do it.
Then you leave this space open. But I think the physicality is obviously a great point to mention. Caicedo, a brilliant footballer, probably one of their best performers this season. But you think of the minutes that they've had, and Maresca, this is another point to touch on probably. The amount of substitutions that he's made and the way he's used them.
At half-time as well.
And they've not always been the best substitutions. I think he's trying to use them more, but particularly early on in the season, he didn't use too many substitutions. And I think, in a way, there are a lot of factors that are all sort of contributing at the same time. You've got the minutes that the players are playing, the fact that you don't have too many leaders in the team, bar Reece James. I think Enzo Maresca has mentioned that himself. Obviously, I touched on the crowd not too long ago. The style not being like a Chelsea style. That they're used to sort of exciting moments, and your Eden Hazards and your Diego Costas and your players like that. And you sort of combine all of these things. There's obviously injuries to Fofana and players like that. So all of those things in conjunction are definitely contributing. But I think the physicality aspect in the run-in to the end of the season is certainly one. Because look, if you're playing a very transitional style in your first half of your season, it's very understandable that you might be tired and you might need to play in a way that protects your legs in the second half.
I was just going to ask you then, I'm looking at the Chelsea team and kind of to wrap the video up, it's like, where do they improve it? Because I think the roles thing, as I've just mentioned, in this system, like they want the roles of the players. And I'm just looking at Chelsea now and I think they need a striker who basically hunts down every ball. And I've never seen a more Chelsea number 9 eventually than Victor Osimhen, because he's obviously... He creates chances in of itself. Like if a ball goes into the box, he'll create a chance from the ball just being in the air, and he'll bring the ball down and he'll do whatever he wants with it. It's a completely different dynamic in terms of what Jackson does, where he's dropping in. But I think when you're playing so deep and you still want to play some transitional football at times and really get at teams when it's a bit more end to end, he can do both sides of that coin. I'm just looking at the Chelsea team, and I'm like, what gets this team 9 more points next season? And I'm looking at the performance in front of goal, the lack of goal scorers in the team, the lack of experience in the team. This is a striker who's done it in the Champions League, multiple leagues. I just think that Osimhen, for me, is like, I've never seen a more fit Chelsea number 9. But I wanted to just ask you, where do you think they look to improve? Because I think the wide areas are key as well, but they bought wide players, and this is why I'm like thinking about the recruitment. They bought wide players and they're not working.
Yeah,
I think Pedro Neto's still got more to do.
But
where would you sign someone for this Chelsea team?
I think it's important to look at basically, are you going with Maresca in this style of football? And if you are, then I think a lot of players don't fit. They're quite awkward fits. Or if you want to take this team that you've got that have quite a few good players, is Maresca the best choice in getting all of the best of their quality? Let's, for example's sake, say they stick with Maresca, and you've kind of got this system in general. I think it's important to probably pair Caicedo with somebody who can sit in a little bit. I like the idea now that teams play with these sort of hybrid 6-8s, two of them.
One can go.
So if Caicedo goes, the other one sits. If this one goes, Caicedo sits, because Caicedo can do both. And this player ideally should be able to do both. So whoever that player might be, whether it's like an Adam Wharton kind of player, I know I mention him for every club because he's the
he's good.
Yeah, he's good, and he's also that ideal profile. But someone like that in the system, I think if you're putting a lot of onus on your wingers to play 1v1 and hold the width whilst your players here have a lot of the central possession, then I think Noni is good. I'm really a big fan of Noni, but I think you need a 1v1.
Because he'd been linked to Garnacho.
Which I think dribbling-wise is...
It makes sense in terms of the profile. I think it'd been linked to Jamie Gittins as well, who's another good, really one-to-one direct dribbler.
I think someone like Nico Williams, for example.
Yeah, Nico Williams. I just think that in this team, like, you need to have like set profiles. City have even done it over the past few years. Your wingers, if you're playing as wide as possible and stuff like that, they need to just be outstanding 1v1. And I'm looking at Sancho, not outstanding 1v1. Neto is probably not his best attribute running at players 1v1. And I think there's a lot to improve on. And I think, as you said there, they need to decide whether or not they're going to stick this out with Maresca, whether or not they can see the future of this style being worth it. And what do you think? Just to wrap it up, do you think it's one that they should stick out with? Because I'm looking at the Chelsea, like, Joe, when a stadium turns on a manager or turns on a style, it's so hard to win it back. It's like the results and the wins and the performances that this Chelsea team would have to go on for them to sympathise with Robert Sanchez losing the ball every single build-up is really, really tricky. And I just feel like there was a bit of angst, wasn't there, with I think Maresca walked down the tunnel after the Fulham game, like straight away. I think he said that he wanted to give the players the moment, but it's like...
But they were chanting, the fans were chanting...
a word that cannot be said. But I just want, do you think, in my opinion, it would scream Chelsea to take him to the summer and probably get rid of him?
Well, I think the higher-ups want to keep him. I think the higher-ups want to keep him. I think... Look, I don't want to compare every manager to Arteta, for example. But Arteta, he had a very young squad that were in a bad situation, and he had the benefit of the doubt that fans weren't in the stadium during the pandemic. So it gave him a few years to kind of build on that.
Maresca doesn't.
With this team, they're a young team, so I don't think the team will rally against him. But I think the fans at Chelsea are used to immediate results, whereas Arsenal went through a period of not winning many major trophies. So if he does go, it will be the fans turning on him. You need that charisma to bridge that gap sometimes, I think. And Arteta had that charisma and he brought it back round and he really got the fans on side. But Maresca and his relationship with the fans seems to be souring more and more. In my head, I'm not, I know managers shouldn't deviate from their principles too much. But if he were to clinch the Champions League and then go again,
last day or something,
and clinch it in a way that maybe plays a little bit more transitional, for example, and then kind of rebuild into his kind of more risk-averse system, then I think that's probably a sensible thing to do. But the style doesn't suit the fans at the moment, and you need top-quality individuals to play in this way, and that's including the backline, 1v1 defenders, and especially the wingers out wide.
No, perfect. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel, and we'll be back next week for some more analysis.